Hey everyone, it's Jim
And Charles
from Valves and More, an online vintage tube store. And today in Tube Lab number 249, we're going to try and answer the question, is equipment burn-in real? But first, caution everyone, electronics and tube amplifiers can have very high voltages present, which can be lethal. Exercise extreme caution when working around them. Always consult a professional technician when in doubt. Well, in the last 2 weeks, we talked about tube burn-in and speaker burn-in. And to recap, tubes need to be burned in, but that should have been done at the factory or in later stages of testing. So sometimes a tube will benefit from a burn-in of maybe 2 minutes to 2 hours. But in most cases, a tube will start to perform at its best a couple of minutes after you plug it in and turn it on. And yes, speakers definitely will change a wee bit with burn-in, in particular larger drivers like woofers. But will you even notice a difference after 24 hours? Especially if you've been tweaking the speaker position, while you're breaking in the speakers themselves. So
it probably makes a much bigger difference.
Yeah. Okay, what about audio equipment like preamps and power amps? Do their sonics change over time? Well, let's take a look at an actual circuit and build to see if we can sort this all out. So this is our very popular universal 6 or 12 SL7 phono preamp.
Not the complete one, just the main PCB.
Yeah.
It doesn't ship like this.
No. And I mean, I would say about 9 out of 10 of our customers actually order it as a kit and they build it themselves. And I'm always amazed at even first-time builders how good a job they do. But for those customers who don't have time or really aren't that interested in building it themselves, we actually will do what I call a professional build, which is always fun because we build a lot of the same basic kit over and over again. So every time I build one, I'm always trying to do an even better job than the one before. They're only small little tweaks, but it sort of relates to what we're talking about today in a little way. So this is one side of the PCB. In fact, this actually faces down. And as you can see here, the vast majority of components in a phono preamp are capacitors, electrolytic capacitors, and of course the PCB. And I don't think anybody's going to suggest that the actual PCB or the traces on it change or the wiring itself changes. We also have coupling capacitors all over the place, and we have a lot of resistors.
Now, there's a lot more resistors on the other side that you can't see. Let's flip it over here.
We can see them.
There we go.
Yeah.
Way more over there.
Yeah. And the reason why they're over here on the second side, or the other double-sided...
the top side.
The top side of the board is because they can actually fit quite easily underneath the top, what is the top plate. So our most common component in a piece of tube gear is probably going to be a resistor. So do resistors shift over time or with temperature? And the answer is yes and yes. Now, do they shift in value a lot over time? No, they don't.
Well, not if you're using them correctly.
Yeah. Now, we're talking about using a correct rated resistor. So look at this. So way over here, we've got little tiny resistors because they really don't have any power on them. So they can be little 1/4 watt resistors. We tend to do a lot of builds with either 1/2 watt or commonly with 1 watt resistors, simply because here's a 1 watt here, these are 2 watts, I think these are 3 watts. There's a real selection of them on the board. We tend to use a lot of 1/2 watt resistors because it's just easier for builders to handle them, and we normally have room for them. They're normally overrated. In fact, when it comes to resistors, if the designer and manufacturer are on the ball, they'll have overrated them substantially. And the reason why we do this is because a resistor will change value as it heats up slightly, and if it's on the edge of the specification and it gets a little bit too much heat, then it can actually shift in value. So by overrating the resistors, what we've done essentially is we've created a more stable resistor in our circuit.
So ideally it will change very little as the temperature changes and over time.
Yeah. So resistors, do they change? Yes. Do they change a lot? Would they affect the circuit? Probably not. Okay, what about capacitors? Well, in a phono preamp, the EQ stage, the RIAA EQ stage, is absolutely critical, and that's over in this area here of the board. And here we've got precision matched capacitors. They don't have any power on them, really, of significance. So they don't have a lot of heat over here. The tube is up here above the top plate. All of the power resistors are back here. So you can see that the layout was actually designed so that the very sensitive parts of the circuit, the input signals, the EQ stages, they're all much less exposed to heat and temperature shifts. And as a result, the EQ is very, very stable in this circuit. So we don't ever hear it shifting. And we did an awful lot of manual and computer sweeps of this particular design, and we never actually saw it shift at all. So
you would see a much higher shift just by swapping tubes out than you would by leaving this running for hours and hours and hours, which is what you want.
Yeah. So that, Charles just mentioned tubes. So that's kind of the elephant in the room that's not even here. But you can imagine the 6SL or 12SL7 gain stage is plugged in here, and the 6N6P cathode follower plugged in here. Those will make a huge difference. And will heating up the tube or running them for 24 hours make a huge difference? No. But what will make a huge difference in this circuit and many tube amplifier circuits, whether they're preamps or power amps, is what tube you're using and the condition of that tube. That will make a giant difference. So let's flip over and talk a little bit about some other things that might change. Well, before we go, we got some silicon over here, some doped silicon. These are all diodes here. They help take our AC mains that's on the secondary side of the transformer, and it converts it into a very raw form of DC on the other end of this rectifier bridge. Well, there's two of them because this is a quasi-dual mono design, and that really gives you an amazing stereo separation. It's one of the secrets of this preamp. And will these shift over time? Probably not. If they do, we might see an extremely small shift in the B+ voltage. That's what powers up this circuit, the high voltage DC that comes off of the final filter stages. In fact, let's flip it over before I...
Yeah, and those diodes are also grossly oversized for the purpose here too. They're each rated for 1 amp, and they're passing nowhere close to that amount of current.
Yeah. So, yeah, overrating. Now, there's a lot of overrating is simply done because of standardization. So, and we do the same thing. I mean, we have a lot of parts in stock, which is a huge financial investment. And we do that so that we can ship quickly. And I think the last professional build we did of a phono preamp, we just shipped it yesterday or the day before. Mm-hmm. I think it took us 8 or 9 days, start to finish, something like that, including testing in system. I always like to spend a day testing in system. So getting back to what we were talking about, you can tell we're passionate about our kits. They just sound amazing. What about these electrolytics? Well, electrolytics in circuit, when you energize them, they actually change a little bit, but the vast majority of these are all in the filter stage, and if they do shift a little bit, maybe the noise floor goes up or down very, very slightly, but the noise floor of most preamps like this phono preamp have to be extremely low to start with anyways. So will that affect the sound? Probably not significantly. So is there anything here that will affect the sound significantly over time other than the tubes? Well, let's look at the schematic and see why that we're probably not going to see a big change. And we've never heard a change, and we've broken in countless of these units, both in prototype stage and as professional builds for customers. So let's just follow the signal. So we've got our RCA in jack right here. We have a load resistor that sets the input impedance. It's not on the signal path. Yeah, it's between, it's in parallel with the signal path and ground here, but it's not actually on it. So here's our cute little signal coming off of our phono cartridge. We have a little 220R, that's a 220 ohm resistor, that's a grid stopper here. That just helps keep parasitics off of the grid, because the grid can be very, very sensitive, particularly on high gain tubes. So grid stoppers aren't always critical, but on high gain stages they are. So we have a gain stage here. We take the signal off the plate. We couple through a coupling cap here. That's not an electrolytic, okay? And that's an important distinction, because an MKP or MKT, the metallized polypropylene capacitors are very, very stable. They don't shift a lot over time. And if they're properly rated, they should last essentially forever, so long as they're not exposed to any extreme voltages or other hanky-panky. We have a little resistor in here that's part of the EQ circuit, so it's actually in the signal path. But as we talked about earlier, resistors really don't shift a lot. Our signal is now bigger, and it's inverted because we took the signal off of here. We have an
Actually, we should put a little qualifier with that. Resistors don't shift a lot. Modern resistors don't shift a lot. If you have an old piece of equipment with an older technology, it's it's not a guarantee, basically.
Yeah, well, years ago we used carbon resistors, and they work just fine, but they're nowhere near as accurate or stable as a metal film that we use typically today. But believe it or not, some recreators of guitar amps, instrument amps, will actually use older components because they're trying to capture that sound of the past. I'm not going to get into that. We're going to avoid that. So we're on the grid of the second stage. So we have two identical gain stages. Again, we take the signal off of the plate. And here we are right here. We're coupling again, identical coupling capacitors. Our signal is inverted. We're coming into the grid of the cathode follower. We take the signal, here's the cathode resistor right here and here. We take the signal off here, and we couple, and we're out. So what are we going through? We're going through a handful of resistors, and we're going through a handful of coupling capacitors. And one of the things that we do in critical listening and component selection is we look for stable, high quality components that actually don't change the sound. Now, you'll hear a lot of people talking about how coupling capacitors, let's switch over here. Here are the coupling capacitors. So we've got one on each channel here on the input stage, and the interstage here going to the cathode follower. We have another pair of them. There's your cathode follower here. This is your last tube stage. And then we have a larger one on the output stage. We choose Vichys because they're a very neutral sounding cap. In fact, I think the biggest compliment you could pay them is that you just don't even hear them.
They sound like they're not there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, is there going to be a shift in sound as you turn a piece of gear on, particularly when it's brand new? Yeah, absolutely, there will be. Will it be significant? I don't think so. And we've never heard a shift of any significance while we're critically listening to gear. And that includes tube power amps as well. And we've prototyped a lot of gear over the years. So yeah. Now, what could be happening is you've brought in a new piece of gear and it is completely different than anything you've heard before. If you put something like our phono preamp into your system, and you were running, let's say, a solid state phono preamp or a 12AX7 phono preamp, which is a god-awful tube to choose for a phono preamp.
Very common for high gain uses, unfortunately.
Now, you put this into your system, I don't think you're going to hear it shift over time, but your initial impression will be like, holy shit, this thing sounds amazing. And will it sound different to you after that first initial listening session? Yes, it will. And it will because you're still learning the new sound.
Still processing the differences.
Yeah. And that's a real thing. It's not an imaginary thing. So it's tricky. I mean, as critical listeners, particularly when we're tuning a piece of gear or auditioning a new circuit, it can be tricky because we need to both hear the gear for what it sounds like, sort of on its own, and we also have to listen for the differences that we're hearing that are good or bad or just the same. And we actually had that experience recently. We just put in the first prototype build of what will hopefully become, eventually, with much development work, a new modern line, solid state, pure Class A. We're hoping pure Class A. Pure Class A means no feedback, monoblock. And right away, we could hear immediately the bass was superb. Mm-hmm. Mid-range was just okay, and the treble was grating, and we didn't have to step too far outside of our norm to hear those things. And then when we came back and listened to it again, thinking, well, maybe it will have changed a little bit. No, that treble was just as bad as it had been before. And
but that's not to say that the second listen wasn't useful, because we do learn more about the sound as we're coming into it, and it does affect our opinions on it. I mean, we heard a lot more detail out of it. Certain parts of the music, certain instruments sounded very, very good. Other ones, not so much. So it is useful, and you do learn the sound as you continue to listen over time.
Yeah, that's right. So when we're critically listening to a piece of gear, and this would apply to anybody who's auditioning a piece of gear or over at a friend's place, they've got one of our phono preamps or one of our control preamps or one of our power amps, or some other piece of gear. There are other pieces of gear out there, and you're listening to it. You really can't jump in too much with your friend on the negative side, because that's dirty pool. But what you can do is make some mental notes, especially if you like the gear, and start to think about what you like, what you don't like. Now, if your friend says to you, Jim, honestly, I'm not going to be upset with you, tell me what you think. Then you have to be kind about it, but you can point out the pluses and minuses. Start off with the best parts of what you're hearing and move on from there. So critical listening is mostly a skill that you have to learn and practice and learn some more, and you'll get better and better at it. And I think you'll find as you go deeper into the hobby and you get more experience that you're going to hear the shifts in the sonics of a new piece of gear more for what they are, and that is, in fact, you learning the sound as you as you listen deeper and deeper into it. Just like when we critically listen to a piece of gear and we come back to it a second time, and we can sort of ignore the overview now, and we can start to focus on the sonics that we're really interested in, maybe the great parts, maybe the parts that we're not happy with. And it's all good, basically. So I would say, though, if you audition a piece of gear with an open mind and a really good couple of test tracks, at least 3 good test tracks that you know, and it sounds really good initially on listening, it's probably going to sound at least as good a week from now, 2 weeks from now, a month from now. Good gear, it doesn't stop being good sounding gear. Something that sounds a little different than you're normally used to, maybe a treble presentation that it's not harsh, but it's very detailed.
They can kind of go either way.
Yeah, that could take a little bit longer to actually get used to. So you may have had in your system, you may have had flabby bass, or you may have had really muddy treble, or a recessed mid-range, and your new piece of gear, well, the bass tightens up. Well, nobody is going to argue about bass tightening up. Yeah, everybody's just like, yes, I love the bass. The mid-range, a little bit forward, more prominent in the mix all of a sudden. That could take a little bit of time to get used to, and you'll have to decide, I'm not so sure I like it up forward and really up front kind of mid-range, which is a lot of our recorded music sits in the mid-range. Treble, that's probably the number one question we get from people, and it almost always relates to the tubes. And never forget, the tubes are the amplifiers. And a lot of modern tubes have treble that's got an edge to it. In fact, it starts somewhere in the mid-range and it goes up into the higher frequencies. I have no idea why modern tubes have this problem. Vintage tubes, generally speaking, as a whole, on the average, do not have that kind of a grating mid-range or treble. So that's a bit of a confusing thing. Now, if you had a treble that wasn't very clear, wasn't very well presented in your existing system, and all of a sudden it's got amazing clarity and it's right there in your face, and you're on an audiophile, you probably are leaping for joy. But if you're not used to that, if your speakers have horn-based tweeters or metal dome tweeters, that could take some time. And then I would say for that kind of a shift in sonics, you probably are going to want to give yourself at least a couple of weeks and just relax, chill out with your music, and see a couple of weeks from now if you like that treble, or if maybe the tweeters that you've got are just not, they're just too they're too hard on the treble. So if you've got a really well recorded high-end, an audiophile recording or a remastered recording in which they've cleaned up that muddy treble, and you're running horns for tweeters or metal dome tweeters, you might not be able to live with that improvement in the treble, even though it's actually closer to the original recording, the way the engineers mixed and mastered it. So
it might just be a little too fatiguing to listen to.
Yeah. Now, you could shift that with tubes in some cases, but in many cases, it's really the tweeter that's responsible for that. It's not necessarily going to be the room. It's probably, if you're running a nice set of vintage tubes, it's probably not the tubes. It's probably the tweeters. Though in some cases, it can even be the cables. And we're not going to do an episode on cables. That's just, it's too difficult to do.
It's a big can of worms.
It's a big can of worms. I can say, though, that we custom build most of our cables. I just actually built a set of balanced cables, and we use high quality wire with very low resistance in the circuit and very low capacitance, and I've never heard a cable change sound. So now, all of our cables sound very neutral to start with.
And that's what you want, really.
And that's what you
don't
want.
want to hear a difference with the cables.
Yeah, if you switch cables and the cables are changing the sound dramatically, I would really be asking,
there's something else going on here.
there's something else going on here. And I mean, it could be a badly manufactured cable, or it could be an overly long run of cables. But yeah, I would question if you're hearing a difference in when you shift your cables, if you're going from one high quality cable to another. So Charles actually has a few interesting tubes that came in. Why don't we clear the decks and we'll take a look at those. Okay, what have you got for us, Charles? Okay. Oh, and before we go into the tubes, we should pass along a heads up to everybody.
Yeah, we've got to talk about tariffs, unfortunately.
Yeah, now we ship around the world and our shipping policy is basically the same around the world. So we can get to almost everybody with flat rate $20 shipping. And if your order is $150 or more, after discount, the shipping's on us. But the duties and taxes and tariffs are all the responsibility of the purchaser. And many countries have free trade agreements or beneficial trading partner agreements with Canada. And until recently, we had the same thing with the U.S. Now, there's going to be a big shift, possibly, maybe. We're not sure. Nobody knows.
Yeah, supposedly at the end of the month, the $800 exclusion for everything that's under that value, not having a tariff applied, supposedly that's going away.
So that would be August 1st, 2025. But things have changed in the United States so much over the last, 6 months, on almost a daily basis that who knows. But if you have an order that is going to be, well, first of all, you've got a couple of weeks. So if you were planning on ordering something large, we normally ship within a couple of days. So if you send us a note and you say, I'm concerned about the tariffs, we always hop to it, but we'll hop to it on double time and get it out the door so that you'll have it free and clear of that whole issue.
There's also some exceptions too. So if the tubes actually originated in the US, then they should actually be exempt as well, and we will try to mark it as clearly as we can on the boxes so that customs doesn't hit you with it.
However, our experience is that people that work in customs are about as
Yeah, you can put a neon sign in front of their face and they won't see it.
So, yeah, and we've done exactly that.
So it's just some forewarning. Unfortunately, if you get a tariff bill on something that you order in from us, there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah. Now, what you could do is order smart and get your order in before the tariffs come in. Keep an eye actually on your own government websites to see what is in fact in place and what the rules are. And given how many of these announcements have not been realized or been taken down after 24 hours, I'm not convinced that we're going to see this change, but it's just a heads up.
Yeah, we really just don't know.
Yeah. Okay, Charles.
Back to the tubes. All right, so I've been continuing to go through our stock of great vintage 12SN7 tubes and looking for interesting things. And we've got these beautiful GE tall boys with filament bridges. And these are just really nice tubes. I don't know why we don't see these in the 6SN7 category. Maybe they were made in a particular factory and all they had sitting around were these larger glass bottles. Who knows? But they sound exactly like the 6SN7 GTA and GTBs. They have the beautiful glowing filament bridges on them, which everybody loves on these GE tubes. And they just sound beautiful. They're great in cathode follower stages, in voltage gain stages. And we have a large number of them, new old stock, new in box, tight matching, and they're just great tubes. We love the GEs. We would love to get more of the 6SN7s, but they're starting to dry up just like everything else.
Now, caution everyone, a 12SN7 doesn't work in a 6SN7 circuit, right? But since we started introducing universal kit amps, a lot of manufacturers have started making switchable filaments.
So to take 6 or 12 volt tubes.
Yeah. So that's a great thing. So I'm really glad for that, because that gives you a huge increase in range and availability of vintage tubes. Mm-hmm. What else have we got?
Now over here, we've actually seen this as a brown base 6SN7. This is actually a Raytheon 12SN7 GT. So you can tell we've got these extra support posts here. These are fairly rugged tubes, and also very early ones. I believe these are probably GT equivalent. Although I think the brown base ones may have been considered a GTA or a GTB, so they might survive a more modern circuit, but they sound great. We only have, I think, 2 pairs of them and maybe a couple of singles. And these would just be a fantastic early tube. Great warm mid-range on them. Just an overall great sounding tube.
Yeah, we've been really lucky since Charles designed his listening testing preamp. It was basically designed so that we could clear for noise pretty much any preamp tube that we sell. And what we didn't really expect at the time was that Charles would be critically listening to the sound of these tubes as he cleared them. And that's really given you kind of an insight into the sonics of so many tubes that we typically wouldn't put in system.
Yeah, I mean, I've listened to the same equipment with a different preamp tube at the front of it. Probably at least 100 different kinds of tubes in that front end stage now at this point. And it's really interesting hearing the differences that each one of them brings to the signal chain and to the sound. It's a joy being able to roll them like this, because it really gives me a good personal in-depth look at how each one of them affects things.
Okay, well, thanks for doing that, Charles. And if you stayed till the very end, here's some discount codes to help you out. We were talking earlier about flat rate shipping and free shipping on orders of $150 and more after discount, but you can grab some discount codes, and there's a secret code that's pretty easy to figure out. Lots of people grab it. And if you were thinking of making a big order, I would strongly recommend you get it in. If you're in the US, I would get it in the next 2 weeks. And then not 2 weeks, in the next week.
It's going to depend on when it hits customs.
And then we'll see what happens August 1st. Well, this is Jim.
And Charles.
Signing off. Cheers, everyone.